The vendor landscape in MedTech has changed. If you've tried to move a device forward recently, you've probably felt it. Longer lead times, higher staff turnover, shifting expectations, and a general inconsistency that can make even straightforward tasks feel like firefighting. Test labs are booked out months in advance, regulatory expectations keep expanding, manufacturing teams are doing their best under significant pressure, and the number of interconnected standards that a device has to meet just seems unending. After more than 175 medical device projects, we've learned that these stresses aren't due to bad intentions. They're the result of an industry going through a long period of transition. Experienced machinists, seasoned technicians, and long-standing regulatory staff have retired or moved into other roles. Many test labs are no longer just testing, they're reviewing full documentation packages for alignment across multiple standards. And vendors who once operated with near seamless processes are still trying to reestablish their own stability. So how should founders navigate this environment? The answer is to expect such things and to discover them early, on purpose. In other words, you need test balloons. A test balloon is a deliberate early experiment, a pilot build, a pretest, a sprint, or a limited scope regulatory consult. These small, intentional steps surface misunderstandings and failure modes before they become even more costly. Take electrical safety testing. Many founders believe that once the electrical design is done, the device is ready for IEC 60601 testing. But today, a device cannot even begin formal testing unless several things are already in place. First, the design does have to hold up to a level of scrutiny that's somewhat unusual, and that often requires rework after the first test. A complete reviewable risk analysis must already exist. Labeling, instructions, and supporting documentation must be prepared because the test lab reviews them alongside the device. Pre-testing, whether a pre-scan or a gap analysis, is no longer really optional. It's the difference between learning in weeks and losing half a year. Startups frequently arrive at test labs far too early because they didn't realize the testing process depends on documentation, labeling, risk analysis, intended use, and performance claims, all of which must align before the lab will even schedule a test. A similar pattern appears in product specification. Many founders assume a device is easily specifiable. Just make it work. In reality, every device exists within ranges, and determining acceptable ranges is rarely straightforward. A prototype that worked once does not define an ongoing specification. And clinicians often describe performance in terms of feel rather than measurable tolerances. Inventors may assume machining can hold tolerances tighter than industry norms. Teams assume that user needs map directly to design requirements when they often don't. Some founders expect an industry standard path for innovations that have never existed before. And this leads to the most common surprise in development. The team didn't get what they thought they were getting. In this case, not because the vendor didn't care, but because no one truly understood what the specifications should have been. Both sides moved ahead on assumptions that no one articulated. This is why sacrificial prototypes, trial builds, pilot sprints, they matter. They help you discover what you actually want before you bet your schedule on it. Regulatory consulting has its own version of the problem. Some consultants rely on boilerplate advice that quietly limits claims or narrows the future market without explaining the trade-offs just made. Effective regulatory guidance isn't about quick answers, it's about mapping the levers, the claims you want to make, the tests and documentation those claims will require, the levers that will appear later, and the ambiguity you're inevitably embracing. The right consultant doesn't eliminate uncertainty. To the contrary, they reveal it so that you can navigate. Engineering partners, test labs, and component vendors each require test balloons of their own. Engineering teams should be able to provide meaningful early output, a feasibility prototype or a sprint result, not distant promises. Test labs should perform pre-tests and gap reviews. Component vendors should be evaluated through small, well-defined orders with clear acceptance criteria. For custom components, functional samples should prove feasibility before large commitments are made. We've seen vendors ship assemblies that physically could not have functioned. Early test balloons on their end would have exposed those issues before schedules were impacted. Culture remains a crucial indicator. Many teams across the industry are stretched, rebuilding, or overloaded. Engagement varies widely. When you evaluate a vendor, pay close attention to whether they show curiosity, ask questions, and demonstrate ownership. If they aren't engaged at the start, they're not suddenly going to become engaged later. And we can set the tone ourselves by choosing to care about the people we work with. Care is kind of contagious. At Intubeing, we also emphasize what we call the dollar in your pocket rule. If this were your own dollar and you're working on this project, would you do it this way? If not, what would you change? Even if the client makes a different decision expressing how you would safeguard their investment as if it were your own, creates alignment and clarity. Ultimately, the teams who succeed aren't the ones who try to avoid uncertainty. They're the ones who expose it early. Every design choice branches into a tree of downstream effects. Every variable must be discovered and understood. Progress comes from intentional discovery. Small starts, pre-tests, feasibility sprints, trial builds, clarified acceptance criteria, and a willingness to learn before scaling. Vendors and partners manage parts of the work, but the startup ultimately still owns the outcome. Certainty in MedTech doesn't come from a false confidence or soup-to-nuts contracts. It comes from learning early, consistently, and intentionally. That is the purpose of test balloons and why they are more essential than ever in today's environment. If you enjoyed today's content, please like and subscribe, share these videos, and let us know what you'd like to hear more about.